I'm just now finally getting around to putting away all of the music that I performed in December, all of the holiday music with the chorale that I play for. And I actually ran across this Antonio Vivaldi Gloria RV589 that we performed. And it had me thinking about actually an error that I found in the score. So I figured, why not kind of talk about my thought process behind how I figured out that there was an error, what was kind of the red flag behind it. Because, you know, as an accompanist or even as a musician in general, it's just good to know what's going on in your score because it will help you to prevent a disaster. And in this case, a harmonic disaster. I'm Krystal Thomas, a classical concert pianist, and on my channel I talk about classical piano, classical music, tips, strategies, performances. And so if you like that type of content, please subscribe and like and share. The Gloria RV589 was written by Antonio Vivaldi. You might know that composer from his famous piece, The Four Seasons. But this piece is actually written around 1716, which would be considered the Baroque period. And it consists of 12 total movements. But I'm actually going to be focusing on just movement number 4, which is the Gracias Agimus Tibi. And by the way, this piece is actually written for choir, 4-part harmony with instrumentalists as well. It is an adagio, which means kind of a slow movement, right? But it's very short. It's only 6 measures long. So I'm going to play it for you. And as I play it, see if you can figure out where the error is. Okay, so I just got finished playing the accompaniment, which is the orchestral reduction. So in other words, when the instrumentalists are not there, the strings and the trumpet and all of so forth, we could just play it on piano until they get there for the actual performance. So the error actually occurs in measure number 5 in the left hand. Okay, so I'm just trying to see if you found that for yourself when you were listening to it. But let's think about how I kind of found that out. Okay, so let's kind of talk about some of the things that were highlighted that had me kind of think about why that would be a red flag. Why in measure number 5, the left hand, the B natural there is an error. So I'm going to talk about kind of 3 approaches. The first approach is that when you look at the score and you think about the harmonies and how they change from measure to measure, you'll notice that something strange is happening in measure number 5. So when I look at the score, I see that every time the chord is introduced at the beginning of the measure, the entire measure repeats that same chord or the same harmonies. It does not change. Okay, so you know, measure number 1 you have, right? And then it just repeats that again at a faster rate, right? So a half note and then 2 quarter notes. Then the second measure, you have a new harmony, right? The C major chord, and it just repeats again, nothing changes. And then it kind of continues with that pattern all the way through. But when you get to measure 5, you notice that it introduces a chord at the beginning of the measure, right, with an A sharp in the left hand. But the pattern, instead of repeating that same pattern without changing any of the notes, it actually changes to a B natural in the left hand in beat 3. So I would expect to have A sharp in the left hand and then repeat again. However, it changes from an A sharp in the left hand to a B natural. So that's just kind of unexpected. Instead of playing the exact same notes, we had a change in the left hand, and it's just kind of throwing off the pattern of all of the measures that happened before it. So after realizing that the pattern changed in the piano part, I tried to look at, you know, what's going on in the choral parts. Okay, so you want to look at what's happening in the soprano, alto, tenor, and bass parts. And when you look at the soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, they also are keeping the exact same note throughout each of the measures, right? So whatever note is introduced at the beginning, it repeats and does not change until the following measure. And so this will prove to be kind of very important, because if you notice that everybody else is doing one thing, and you kind of expect it to do that same thing in your accompaniment part, then you know the expectation is that something fishy might be there, that you want to consider a potential error maybe. And then also, when I'm looking at the other instruments, I'm going to pay closer attention to what's happening in the bass part, because the left hand in the accompaniment part tends to pretty much mirror exactly what the bass is doing. So when I look at the bass part, I see that in measure 5, they have their A sharp there, and it's actually written in their score to repeat the A sharp before going to the B natural. And so, you know, it's very not likely that the left hand in the piano part would veer away to the B natural when the basses in the vocal part is staying on the A sharp. So the piano probably wants to stay on A sharp as well. And then I also want to point out, just kind of looking at the music theory or the harmonic analysis of the piece. And so I noticed that in the score, the fourth movement is in the key of E minor. And so E minor would be considered the tonic chord, or the one chord. So you notice that the piece starts with the one chord, right? And it takes us all the way to the very last measure, which is in the key of B major, right? And B major would be the dominant or the 5 chord of E minor, right? So we're going from the 1 chord to your 5 chord at the very end, which really in your ear you want to resolve that to E minor, right? But the composer wants to end on a B major or dominant, which actually leads us into the next movement, which the movement number 5 starts in B major or the dominant as well. So it's a good link. But my point is this: if I'm leading to B major in the very last chord or the last measure, the measure before that with the A sharp in the left hand, that can serve kind of as like a leading tone into the B for B major, to the dominant. And so my question is just that, why would the composer want to kind of spoil the surprise? If I know that I'm going to end the movement in B major, if everyone else is on the A sharp or this chord that's leading into the B major, I would be hard pressed to think that he would want to kind of spoil that B surprise by bringing it in the left hand, the measure before everyone else brings in that dominant chord. So we would want to go from the A sharp to the B major chord together as a group. Okay, so that was just kind of another red flag. But how can you be completely sure? Well, I tell you what, you can actually double check all of this by looking at the actual instrumental parts, right? So if I'm playing the accompaniment and it's meant to be an orchestral reduction, then, you know, let's look at the instruments that is actually supposed to be played by the piano, or what the piano is meant to be playing. So when you look at the orchestral score, you will see that the this movement just has kind of strings, right? So if I'm looking at the violin part, viola part, cello, and basses, we see that they all also are keeping the same pitch that they began each measure with, and they're kind of repeating it through without changing it in the middle of the measure. And then likely when you zoom into the bass part and you zoom into the organ part, which is what the left hand of the piano and the accompaniment was trying to mirror, you'll notice that those notes are also staying on the A sharp, and they're not resolving to the B or the dominant note until the very last measure. So that's how you know that, oh wow, there was kind of a typo there. And it's not meant to be a B natural in the middle of measure 5. It's actually meant to just remain in the A sharp. So how would it sound? It would sound like this. And that would be the correct way of playing those measures in movement number 4. Yeah, so that was fun. That was interesting. The point of the video was just to kind of remind ourselves that it's important to look at the patterns, think about the time period that you're in, think about what the other instrumentalists and musicians that you're working with are doing, so that you can realize if there potentially might be an error in the score. And if you can identify those things soon enough, you'll be able to rectify them before the performance. So very important to dive deeply into the score. And if something strikes you as weird, maybe question it. Maybe go in and do a little bit more of an analysis. Maybe it's correct, but maybe it's not. Who knows? Let me know in the comment section if you ever found an error or typo in a musical score before, and how did you find that error? Share that with us. It's really not common that, an error will be in a score, but it happens. Thanks for sticking with me all the way to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the content, you might enjoy my other video on the 5 things that I wish I knew when I was beginning piano. Those tips might be useful to you. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you are notified when I upload another video. See you next time.